Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Purple Way podcast. My name is Paris, and today I have the pleasure to talk to Sankalp Garud. Sankalp, how are you?
Very well, sir. Thank you for having me.
No, my pleasure. Thank you so much. So, I would love to start with your background. So,
hmm
it's quite an interesting background that you have. So, let's start from there. Tell me a little
hmm
bit about you and who you are.
Sure. So I'm Sankalp. I very recently completed my PhD in psychology and neuroscience and that kind of thing from the University of Oxford. I've been also meditating for quite a long while. So fundamentally, understanding the mind is my business, and I've had like a podcast on it on emotional intelligence and so on. So yeah, just try to promote the message of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and I think you're doing a very good job, to be honest. I have been following you. I
Thank
saw
you.
you on Threads, and then I started reading through your content, and I was like, wow, like that's
hmm
another like that's beautiful. And then also I went to your YouTube channel. I saw
hmm
your interview about like
hmm
nice guys and etc. And
Sure.
I was like,
Yeah.
okay, let me reach out and see if you would be
Lovely.
interested to come here. Yeah. Um, what's interesting for me is like I would like to understand like where did your excitement for neuroscience and psychology
Hmm.
come from?
Sure. Yeah. So I think when I was like about 18 or something,
Mm-hmm.
I just realized that, the mind is very important. It's like
Mm,
it's
sure.
whatever we see the world, it is filtered through the lens of our minds.
Yeah.
And further, I realized that, happiness, like, the sense of living a good life, it fundamentally happens in the mind. So there are
Mm.
instances where people have had like terrible outer circumstances, and yet they have like had the most happiest, most fulfilled life. And on the other
Yeah.
hand, you see billionaires with every resource in the world, and yet they don't have the best of lives. And so what's
Mm.
happening then? What's happening is they don't have the skills, the emotional skills to live a happy life. And on the contrary, when you don't have anything in the external world, you have great
Yeah.
skills internally and you live a great life. So I realized that a fulfilled life happens to the mind, and therefore
Yeah.
studying the mind is the most important thing I could do. And I've tried to do that ever since through meditation, through formal PhD studies. But at some point, I also realized that it's also about suffering. Like at that point, I was
Mhm.
18, I was happy and whatever. But then I realized, look, my friends are going through these health and emotional, mental health challenges.
Yeah.
Myself had a bad health crisis, and I was like
No.
misdiagnosed and put through a different psychiatric department where that was just not the case, and so on. So it started as a very happy-go-lucky thing, but then I also had a lot of suffering, and then they're like, oh, now I really need to study this. And that's where
Yeah.
the study of niceness and all of that we'll talk about later comes from.
Yeah. 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 No, that's interesting. And it's interesting. So would you say kind of like in a sense that, you were observing, the world, let's say, right? And you were like, wow, like
Hmm.
why people who have all the resources are not happy,
Hmm.
whereas like other people, let's say, for example, can achieve or, be content and happy with their lives. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
That.
theoretically, yes. But I remember this one practical moment I had in a
Mm.
meditation retreat where I was, sitting,
Mhm.
and I noticed that there was like a lot of pain in my knee. And our normal reaction is, you just like gotta get rid of the pain or whatever. But I
Yeah.
just like sat with it for a bit, and then I
Yeah.
noticed that it sort of disappeared. And
Mm.
what I realized was that the pain itself does not go away, but my relationship with that pain changed. Like I was no longer sort of avoiding it, I was no longer pushing it down. And there were some sensations of burning and aching and tingling, but that's just
Yeah.
about it. It stopped having that power over me. And so that was like my up and close experience where I was like, oh, there's some power in our minds and the way we see our world.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, kind of in my personal life as well. Like, I think the relationships that we have, and I think it's also, I would say, with emotions. The relationship with we have with emotions is very interesting because
Mm,
like another one that I hear is that like we should conquer or control, be able to control our emotions, and I think a
mm,
lot of people, go about life
mm,
with the emotions controlling them rather than the
mm,
human brain, etc.,
mm.
controlling the emotions. So that's
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
going through a few kind of like emotions like that right now.
Mm,
But I would love to come to your meditation, and I think that's where it helps. That can help a lot.
mhm.
So I think you practice mindfulness meditation. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah,
So
mindfulness.
how would you describe mindfulness meditation? Like, what is it for people who
Sure.
might not know?
Sure. So mindfulness meditation is simply, very simply put, it's like being with the present moment but it's like
Mm.
a very wise way of being with it. It's not just, oh yeah, I'm here or whatever, but it's
Yeah.
done with this attitude of what's called equanimity, which is, you're like balanced, and you bring that balanced perspective to what's happening in this moment. So even if it's something very pleasurable, you are not like totally distraught and just like,
Yeah.
basking in the glory. Although it's good to enjoy things, I'm not saying don't enjoy things, but at the same time, when you're in pain, it's still a
Yeah.
balanced perspective. So mindfulness is being with the present moment, with
Mhm.
an equanimity, an equanimous attitude.
Yeah, yeah. And what they prompt you to start? Because, like, for example, I think you also went to China for a little while, and you
Hmm.
were in a Zen
Hmm.
monastery. So, how did the meditation come into your life?
Sure. I think the way it came in my life is my grandfather was a very prominent fanatic, let's just say. He used to do
Okay.
these long 40-day retreats, 30-day
Wow.
retreats, whatnot.
Yeah.
So he comes from this more of a deeper background. And
Hmm.
he just took me to one retreat. That's just about it. Of course, I had some inkling for it. Like I
Hmm.
did some guided meditations before exams and, just calm myself down. But through a
Yeah.
formal retreat is my grandfather
Hmm.
introduced me to meditation. Yeah, I've been to China ever since. I lived with some Zen monks for 30 days or so. So
Yeah.
that was fun.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's a beautiful experience. The only thing, like for example, I have kind of done is like I had gone to Nepal and I did
Mm-hmm.
like a meditation, like for Vipassana meditation for
Mm-hmm.
like I think I could last like 5 days because like Vipassana is that you don't talk and you
Mm-hmm.
walk very slowly and like all movements are slow,
Yeah.
right? And I was like 19 years old and I just couldn't. I had too much
Mm.
energy after like the third day of not talking and doing
Right.
like absolutely nothing, right? Apart of
Mm.
meditating and eating in a
Mm.
very slow way. I just
Mm.
had too much energy. And I
Yeah.
like, it was for me to be there for 7 days. I just lasted
Mm.
five and I said, no, I can't do it anymore. Like I just
Yeah.
have too much energy.
Yeah. Yeah. So
It's interesting.
Vipassana is the same as mindfulness, right? It's just like the English way of saying it. And
Yeah.
I've done like 5 of those kinds of 10-day retreats now. Um,
Wow.
and it is, I mean, as you said, you don't speak for 10 days. And, especially when you're like a teenager, that's like
Yeah.
they don't even allow teenagers. They here they say that, at least you should be 20. And I
Mm.
attended when I was 19 and I had to apply for an exception. And I was
Oh
just like,
wow.
hey, look, I know what it is. My grandfather does it. So there was a bit of an exception they made for me. But yeah, it's extremely difficult experience, and I don't even necessarily recommend retreats because of
Yeah.
this how difficult it can be for your body and for your mind.
Yeah, no, 100%. Do you reckon like meditation is important for people? Because, like, for example, I think it has become not a trend, right? But, like, I think definitely it has like a lot of like maybe like, business people, like, etc. You hear them, oh, yeah, I meditate.
Hmm.
Do you think it's important to add it to our daily routine?
Hmm. Um, so I think it's important to understand what the true purpose of meditation is.
Okay.
A lot of people think that meditation is about stress reduction and like feeling calm. But as
Hmm.
someone like you who has done retreats, you can probably attest that it can be nothing but calm in some
Yeah.
circumstances. So, it's not like a guarantee that it will induce
Yeah.
calm. Now, when you do
Mhm.
it for like 5-10 minutes a day, sure, chances are high that it will make you calmer. But that's mostly coming from, just shutting your eyes and staying
Yeah.
quiet. So I would I would recommend it, but you have to be careful about why you're doing it for. And
Hmm.
it is possible that you do it for calm or peace, but there might be a better way to do it, like stretching, for example,
Yeah.
than just meditation. The purpose of meditation is to find what's happening in your mind. What's the truth about my mind? So it's a much
Mm.
more deeper project you're going through when you're
Mm.
meditating. And if you want to undertake that project, then I think meditation is super powerful tool. If you're just
Yeah.
doing it for stress relief, there are many, many things that you can do, and it's not necessary that you meditate.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. That's interesting. It's a very nice perspective because I do agree with you. Like even like now, like I try to meditate like on a daily basis. Like
Hmm.
I go to bed, and I try to meditate like 10 minutes before I go to sleep, right?
Hmm.
And like it's definitely not easy. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Of course, like you have applications, apps on your phone that you can they can navigate you and they definitely help. But like for
Sure.
example, if you just were to put like a timer,
Hmm.
10 minutes,
Hmm.
right? Your thoughts are there. If I were to ask you, okay, cool, could you not guide me through a meditation, but like, what
Hmm.
should I focus on
Sure.
when I meditate? What would you say?
Sure. I think it's for beginners, it's better or easier. The more common thing that they recommend is focusing on your breath, because
Okay.
it's easier to grasp what it is.
Yeah.
It's clear, everyone breathes. So it's not like you need something special with you. So
Yeah.
when I used to take meditation courses, I also have like an online course. I just ask people to start with the breath.
Mm.
And I think that's the easiest way to start, and it's very unambiguous what the instruction is. Whereas, if you talk about thoughts or feelings, then you're like, am I really feeling it, am I doing the right thing? But when you ask people to focus on the breath, then it's very clear. So
Yeah.
that's how I recommend you just start looking at your breath, and you do it
Mm.
for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever is good for you, and then you
Yeah.
can progress from there.
Take it from there. No, that's
Hmm.
good. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I do agree with you. I think breathing is a very good start to begin with, and then take it from there as you progress. I would also like to focus on like friendships and social
Hmm.
connections, and I think that's another topic that you discuss a lot. And in one of your threads, you talk about the importance of friendships and social connections, right? If you can expand on the importance of friendships and social connections, why do you think they matter? Why do they
Sure.
matter?
Sure. So I did my PhD on this, so I have a opinion or two on this, let's just say. So I think if you think
Yeah.
about it, it's if you look at the opposite of friendship, let's talk about loneliness. You see, forget humans, you can, you see even an animal like a fruit fly, which is, like
Mm.
these tiny little fly.
Yeah.
And you can study them because their lifespan is like 40 days or something. So it's easier to see what happens to them and what happens to their lifespan. You see
Mm.
that if you even isolate an animal as, let's say, simple, quote unquote, as the fruit fly, even they show like a reduced lifespan if they're isolated. um,
Wow.
and that just fruit flies, it's equally true in humans. So humans which have a deeper, meaningful, let's say, significant other or good social network and so on, they tend to have a higher lifespan. They have a lower mortality risk, which is a fancy way of saying they don't die sooner. Or
Yeah.
if you're lonely, then you die sooner, I suppose. So friendship has this deep effect on us. And at this point, knowing the effect it has not just on your mental health, but also on your
Mm.
physical health, I feel we should be considering it as like a pillar of health. Just like we think of sleep, we think of exercise, we think of nutrition. I think the
Mm.
fourth pillar, the fourth fundamental pillar of health is social connection.
Ha,
And yeah, I think
that's
there's a lot
interesting.
of evidence to believe that.
Wow. Yeah, I was yesterday I was preparing for kind of another interview, and I had the exact, so I had the triangle, right? And I do really believe that the triangle of like, wellness overall is like good sleep, good nutrition, and good exercise, right? But then also like now we can make it a square and we can put
Hmm.
connections up there, or like maybe within the triangle put connections, because like, within the three you can connect with people, you can
Yeah.
exercise with someone, you can eat food with someone, with your
Yeah.
family, your friends, and
Yeah.
also, well, you can, yeah, whatever, sleep is fine, but like
Yeah.
however you want to call it that. What was the research you found regarding like how connections influence our mental and physical health? Is there a, what's the research on that, if you can
Yeah.
touch upon it?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's this researcher called Casiopo, and
Hmm.
there's a couple, I suppose, but they've looked a lot about loneliness and things like that, and they've
Okay.
seen like type 2 diabetes, the rates of incidences are much higher. There's things like I told you about the lifespan and mortality
Hmm.
risk. Heart disease tends to be a thing which is a higher occurrences in people who are slightly lonely or don't have as much of a social fabric, social network.
Mm.
Um, and then there is, on the positive side, you see findings like people who have a better social network, they tend to get things like the common cold less, or they have show
Oh
less
wow.
symptoms of common cold. So there was this one study where they literally injected a flu virus or a cold virus. I don't remember which one.
Mm.
Whatever uh, they triggered the immune response, and you could see that the people who recovered sooner were the people who had better social ties. And so I mean, look, this is
That's
correlation. I don't
crazy.
necessarily mean to zoom in on one study, and especially if
Sure.
the study is not replicated and so on.
Yeah.
But the overall direction of multiple research is that it's on the
Mm.
positive side. And in my own research, I've found that, if you're socially thriving, then you're more likely to have higher self-esteem. You're less likely to have impulsivity and anxiety and depression and so on. So that's even true in my research.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And what would you say happens to our brain when we connect with someone? What happens, and then also on the vice versa. I guess maybe you have touched about on it a little bit, but like on the vice versa, what happens when we isolate ourselves?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll start with
Yeah.
that part. So there was a study that came from MIT. The first author's name is Tomova. And
Hmm.
what they did was they looked at social isolation. So
Okay.
they um, deprived people of social contact. And
Hmm.
for another group, they also deprived them of food. So there was one group that didn't have social contact,
Hmm.
and there was the other group which did not have food. And what they found is in the brain, it almost looked
Hmm.
identical. So the idea, and this was part of the brain called where the dopamine is
Mm.
synthesized or made. It's called the midbrain, substantia nigra, VTA, etc. Um, Technique aside, that's where the dopamine is produced, right? And they found
Yeah.
that it effectively looks similar. Like if you ask like a computer to look, it would probably tell these are like similar conditions. So if you don't know
Mm.
where it's coming from, you would think that it's equally bad, the social
Yeah.
isolation and food. And the authors use it to argue that, what, it might be social connection. We might be better off thinking it as a fundamental need, as basic as hunger,
Mm.
potentially, or food. um,
Yeah.
and so that's more on the negative side. On the sort of upside, we've seen that
Mm.
when we connect socially, there's a release of endorphins in the brain, which is the
Hmm.
molecules that make you feel good. It's also released when you exercise,
Hmm.
and so on. Especially with romantic contact, we have this molecule called oxytocin,
Hmm.
which is often called as the cuddle hormone,
Yeah.
or the love hormone in popular culture. So you can imagine that feels good. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's more on the positive side. You can see these positive neurochemicals being released as we form social connections.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because, like, for example, like you can take also the personality of someone, right? Like, someone who listens to this, right? And it's like, oh, like it's easy for you guys because you are maybe extroverts, right?
Mm,
But I'm an introvert, and therefore, like, for me, it's much more difficult to connect with someone because I, gravitate towards, like, needing a lot of time
mm,
for myself to kind of
yeah.
recharge, right? What would you say to someone who is like an introvert and has like a small circle of friends, and they hear that and are like, and they maybe know themselves that they need to put themselves out there, but it's like
Mm,
kind of the character they have is like maybe limiting them. What would you
yeah.
say to an introvert for
Yeah,
that?
yeah. I mean, there's multiple things. First of all, we need to realize that not everyone has the same need for connection, like in terms of
Mm,
quantity of people, right? And that's fine to lie on
yeah.
one side or the other. It's important to not lie to yourself about what your need is, but it's not the case that everyone just literally needs the exact same number of people, and otherwise you're screwed. It's not like that. So you have to
Yeah.
definitely introspect and what where you feel the best and so on. But having said that, I think we could all do with more and better contact, right? And there's
Yeah.
areas of life we could improve. And for that, I think there's this one fundamental part about social connection, which is it needs courage. Like, if you really
Mm,
want to connect with people, you have to go out and talk to people.
yeah.
And you would have to therefore expose yourself to rejection and
Mm,
embarrassment, and you would find people who are not aligned with you, and that could lead to negative experiences. So it's not a sport without its unpleasant sides. But
yeah.
I think no sport is like that. Nothing in life that's worth doing is without its downsides or negative experiences.
Yeah.
So I think that's one reason why people who might identify as introverts may not want to do it, is because it does
Mm.
involve feeling a lot, and a lot of rejection and embarrassment and so on.
Yeah, of course. Like, it's not good. Like, if you think about it from a romantic stance, let's say, for example, like, going in, talking to a girl,
Hmm.
like, it's not easy, right? And of course, like, we all have the fear of rejection because, of course, and as you said,
Yeah,
the embarrassment, right? And I think it's the same like that. Like, you know, you coming from India, and like, how many years have you been living in the UK now?
5 years.
5 years, yeah.
Hmm.
It's like, it's a completely new culture, right? And
Hmm.
like, you have to push yourself maybe a little bit more to kind
Hmm.
of like integrate if if you want it with like people, right? And yeah, as you said, like it's awkward, but it's
Mm.
so important to put yourself out there and like
Yeah.
go through the embarrassment, go through the rejection, because eventually you
Yeah.
will become better. And the people that you will connect with, it will be a very nice experience for both of you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everything you want in life is on the other side of rejections, multiple
Yeah,
rejections, right? So
yeah,
if like a lot of people ask me about how do I get into Oxford and things like that, well, you know what, I got rejected from a lot of places, like duh.
yeah,
And similarly with dating, as you said,
yeah,
like it's very unlikely that the first woman you ever met, and yes, woman for now, if you women are listening, if they want men, whatever, right? The first
yeah,
person you
yeah,
ever met, you it's just
yeah,
it's unlikely that's just going to work out.
yeah,
And part of the process is going through those rejections. And guess what, the rejections themselves are very valuable because
mm,
it helps you build your own sense of self.
yeah,
Like you learn to derive your self-esteem from within and not through just mere approval from people. And I think
yeah,
that skill is way more powerful than any one interaction that you could ever have. So there's a lot of benefit in building that muscle of rejection and confidence.
yeah. No, 100%. It's very interesting. Like, did you within your like maybe PhD or like like have you seen anything on rejection? Like, what does it rejection does to our brain? Like, have you seen any
Sure.
studies or?
Yeah, yeah. So there's this one famous experiment called the cyberball experiment, which
Okay.
is more fancy. It sounds more fancy than what it is. What they made
Okay.
is they make people sit in an MRI scanner,
Mm-hmm.
and they made them play this game called the cyberball game, which
Mm-hmm.
is you pass a ball
Mm-hmm.
to people. So it's like a computer game where you're just like passing a ball within people. But
Mm-hmm.
what happens is after some time, the your co-players stop passing the ball to you, so they exclude you from the group,
Oh,
right? Like a
sad.
playground kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what they
Wow.
find is parts of the brain that are otherwise associated with pain, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken, is the anterior cingulate cortex. But again, I don't know if people want the details of the brain, but there are parts of the brain that sometimes respond to pain, not always,
Yeah.
that light up, and so you can feel that subjective pain reflect in the brain
Yeah.
when you are socially excluded. Yeah.
Damn. Oh, that's so sad. Yeah. Wow. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I don't know why I got it. Maybe I resonate in my
Yeah.
childhood. No, I'm
Yeah.
joking. No, I don't know.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. What would you say? Like, what have you found about the characteristics of a good friend, right?
Hmm.
And what makes a good friend?
Yeah. Yeah. I think fundamentally what you're looking for is alignment of values.
Mm,
So everyone can have a different set of values. So the first step, therefore, is to know what your values are. And a lot of people
yeah.
may not be clear even on that step, right? And therefore, it
Yeah.
might be hard to find friendships because then you don't even know what you want and what what
Yeah.
is what is good. So you're looking for values. So for me, for example, health is a big value.
Hmm.
Growth is a big value. So if I'm like around with like go to restaurants, I normally order slightly healthy, and if
Yeah.
if people are not into that, then we may not resonate. I think you're looking for alignment of values most fundamentally, and then on a day-to-day level, on a conversation-to-conversation level, you're looking at authenticity and vulnerability. You're looking at showing parts of you that you might even hide sometimes. And the meaning, the deep connection that we talk about is normally
Hmm.
showing these parts and being met with acceptance and connection, which will happen if these people are aligned with your values. So
Yeah.
those are the two things you're looking for. In the grand scheme of things, you're looking for values and these alignments. And in the more day-to-day part, you're looking for, can I express myself here? Can I be myself here? Can I,
Yeah.
yeah, can I show all of me? And is that
Yeah.
welcomed? I think
Yeah.
that's what leads to good friendships.
No, I do agree with you. I think that's with values, as you said. Like I have recently come to terms with it in a sense. Like it's so important to align your values with friends, and as well. For example, like on the podcast I heard, both your like kind of your solo for nice guys,
Hmm.
and with the guest that you had, is that like you also have to put boundaries, right?
Hmm.
And that doesn't. It's not only on your like romantic relationships, but it's also on your friendships. Like
Right.
what are you willing to accept from a friend? Like, what if they're late half an
Hmm.
hour every time that you meet them? Is that like a
Yeah.
boundary? Is that like, and it goes
Yeah.
back to values, as you said, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, fair enough. But if you are a person who values their time, and time is a value that you align with,
Right.
um, then yeah, maybe that's not a friend for you to have. I don't know. I'm just saying, like, I don't know, maybe it's a very small example. Or then also, like, for example, like, I think maybe with communication, like, to then tell your friend, hey, I value my time, so can you
Hmm.
please not be late,
Hmm.
again.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Mm.
boundaries go hand in hand with vulnerability. You can have your values, you can have authenticity, but what if your friend just doesn't listen to you when you're talking? That's horrible. Like, you might
Yeah,
be sharing the most deepest, most meaningful thing to you, and your friend is on your phone, on his phone or their
yeah,
phone. um, that doesn't sound good, that doesn't sound right,
no,
right? So yeah, values and vulnerability, they go hand in hand with boundaries. And you have to be able to recognize when um, things are not in alignment with your values.
yeah,
And then the recourse could be, as simple as communicating that, or as greater as ending that connection, right? It depends
yeah,
on what the quote unquote violation was, how often it is, and
yeah,
so on. So yeah, absolutely, you need ultimately, you have to realize that you are most responsible for meeting your own needs, your psychological, like, as long as you're an adult.
yeah,
Of course, if you're not an adult, then someone else is.
yeah, yeah.
And then you are the protector of your energetic garden. I like to think of it as a garden, and if you
Okay.
never have the fence
Mm.
around your garden, there'll be like
Hmm.
infestations. There would be like people who would come and infest it, or you'd be like pests or whatever.
Yeah,
And so you have to think of your mind, your emotions as that garden. And yes, you have to take care of the garden, but then you also have to protect that. You have to have like a fence around it. And those are
yeah,
the boundaries. And same is true for our mind. The same is true for our family. We need, like, we have to lock our doors and so on. The same is true for
yeah,
countries. We need to have like armies and so on. So boundaries go
yeah.
hand in hand with your flourishing in the internal work.
Yeah, no, 100%. I like the metaphor you use with about the garden, and also, like, for example, like, if I were to push that even further, it's like, if you want a beautiful garden, then you also
Hmm.
have to attend to it, right? If your garden is your mind, then you have to attend and take care of your mind,
Hmm.
right? To flourish it and, like, grow it, whatever.
Yeah.
You can't let anyone in, because, like, whoever you let in can also have the potential to destroy your garden, right? Destroy your mind. So yeah, taking care of, or, like, yeah, be mindful of who you let in
Yeah.
is definitely important. Would you say is with value alignment that we can build a meaningful connection with people, or are there more characteristics to build a meaningful connection?
Yeah. I think the other thing to look out for is also, do they have the ability to communicate and relate? So you could have the best of minds and so on, but if you don't know how to, if you don't have the communication skills, if you don't have conversational skills,
Yeah,
which is a whole separate thing of its own, right? Like,
yeah,
quite often we descend into blame when
yeah,
we are with friends or your significant other, or girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. And that's no good. You might not mean it, but your language might come across as if you're putting the blame on someone, like, why do you always do something like that? That
yeah,
that can never help anyone. Whereas you might be thinking, oh, look, I'm asserting my boundary, right? Like, look, the values and whatever. But all it
yeah,
might be coming across is pointing the finger.
yeah,
And there are, like, if you say something like, when you do X, I feel Y, that's
mm,
much better way of communicating it. And all it
yeah,
was is largely a tweak of language, right?
mm.
So it's the communication skills is also another big one that I look out for.
Yeah, no, 100%. I saw a nice YouTube. I can send it to you later, but it was with the author of a new book that is coming out in February called Super Communicators.
Hmm.
And it's very nice. And he talks about, like, for example, there are three types of conversations we have. One is practical, the
Hmm.
other emotional, and the third one social.
Hmm.
So you need to align what kind of conversation you're having with another person. Is it
Hmm.
practical? So it's like, how are you? Or, like, something like that. Then the emotional
Sure.
will be how you feel.
Sure.
And then the social one is like, who you are, something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and it's quite interesting. Like, yeah, like, I like reading books, of course, so, like, I've pre-ordered it, but it's a very good book.
Lovely.
um See, like, because I think we are also on this similar age, right? If we see it from a macro level,
Hmm.
our generation and maybe the younger generation, do we suffer more from a high rate of loneliness?
Hmm.
And what do you think that is?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if I have like generational statistics necessarily about this, but in general, the rates of loneliness are quite high. I think you could think about it in various factors. One is like the more broader economic, technological. perspective, like a very broad thing. So for example, what we have is social media. What
Mm,
we have is a lot of knowledge work or desk work, and that inherently limits your social connection, right? Like imagine if you are like a farmer. There's much more
yeah,
room for, like going on the field, taking your workers with you, talking to the person who's on the next farm, and so on. There's much more opportunity perhaps for social connection, whereas it's not if you're like a computer programmer,
yeah,
right? So there's by design, there's a little bit of isolation built into the kind of economy we are building. So that's
mm,
maybe one reason. The other one, which I know for which more degree of certainty, let's say, is social media. We
yeah,
do know that there is social media is having some effects on mental health, especially when it comes to teenage women, teenage girls.
mm,
But it's I think it's the case for others. Now it's a very new thing, so we don't have like conclusive. So some scientists would say maybe it's not that harmful. Some scientists would say it's the worst thing ever. But I think it's fair to say that things like body image, which and then that's much more pronounced if you're like looking at influencers and seeing their perfect bodies with their perfect lighting, and a girl in whatever India or the UK might think that, hey, look, I don't look like her, like
yeah,
I don't have the figure that she has, and so on, and that could be isolating. You
yeah,
might think that, hey, look, I don't have enough likes that my
mm,
friend has. So there's a lot more like comparison and overt
yeah,
social comparison that these platforms might promote, which might lead to further social distancing and isolation. So yeah, I think there is technological reasons to believe that is the case. And I think
yeah,
on a more individual level, as I said, social connection requires courage.
yep,
And like if you don't build that courage, then chances are that's going to not feel good. So I
yeah,
think that's another reason.
yeah. No, I definitely agree with you. There was a very nice one I had heard once is that, like, being human is being awkward.
Hmm.
Like it's awkward to be human. And I think, like, for example, what you said with social media, it's so easy to be on your phone, right?
Hmm.
And to remove that awkwardness because, like,
Sure.
you don't have another person like what we're doing right now talking,
Hmm.
what I mean, even though we are through screens, but there's still like that social interaction, whereas like
Right.
if you're just texting someone, right, there's no awkwardness. It's like,
Hmm.
I will reply to you whenever, or I
Hmm.
can think what to say for like maybe an hour and then I will reply. So you
Sure.
remove completely the awkwardness
Sure.
of the human elements, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think it's very interesting what's happening now, and I think it's such an important topic to continue talking about it and like just
Yeah.
you know
Yeah, this I don't remember the exact details, but I remember reading about some study which said that the more sort of you talk over each other, sometimes friends, they sort of talk over each other and so on. That
yeah,
can be like a good predictor of how strong that relationship is sometimes, or how connected you feel, because there's that raw authenticity in it. I don't remember the source, so apologies if it's wrong, but I think that makes
yeah.
sense, right? Like
Oh wow, yeah, yeah, yeah. It does make sense. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I do try never to interrupt a friend of mine, but like sometimes, like, yeah, I get you. Like if you get passionate about a
yeah,
conversation you're having and you're just jumping over like someone's
yeah.
talking, yeah,
Yeah, I think it might be more about the
definitely.
permission that you feel that's okay doing so, rather than literally the talking over. Although, I mean, yeah, we need to learn more about it.
Yeah, no, but that's interesting. I do agree with you.
Hmm.
And you have another one that you say proximity drives connection. And I think it's on threads. I'm asking, like, what's your advice on making new friends? But then
Hmm.
also, like, for example, I think we can take it from both like the neuroscience and psychology degree that you have, but then also as a person who has come to the UK from a completely new culture
Hmm.
and, has been living in the UK for 5 years.
Yeah.
So what would you say is your advice?
On proximity
On,
or in
yeah,
general?
proximity drives connection. Yeah.
Right, right. So we were talking about all personal abilities like conquering the
Mm.
fear of rejection, building confidence, and so on. But another big thing to do, let's say, when you want to make great friends, is actually to be in the right environments, right? So
Yes. Yeah,
imagine
yeah,
if I
you have
go
that.
out and if I just start making friends, the chances of me finding someone who is like truly aligns with my values is rather low.
Mm.
And same goes with like dates and so on. There's this whole trend of going out and approaching women, which is like fine, I suppose, as long as it's
Yeah.
whatever, genuine, authentic. But the chances of you actually finding someone who is aligned with your values is rather low in that sort of context, as opposed to, let's say, if I specifically invite the people who I think I would connect deeper with, and I have like a lovely dinner with them. right? So
Mm.
the environment is equally important as your
Yeah.
personal skills are, right? So I would any day take a better environment with like a lower tolerance for rejection and confidence and so on, over
Yeah.
like the most confident person in a unfavorable environment. So proximity is part of that environment larger
Hmm.
narrative, which is, when you are
Yeah.
like, one of the most beautiful ways to connect with people, build friendships, is over meals. We have been as humans, we have been making connection over meals for like as long as humans have existed, right?
Yeah.
So this whole, there's something about that feeling of sitting close to, rubbing shoulder with your friends, passing that food item to them and so on. So yeah, proximity is a big one with friendships. And so I one of my recommendations when you want to make friends or network or whatever is
Yeah.
to attend events first and then throw your own events, and there's nothing more
Ah,
powerful than that.
wow, that's interesting. Sorry, yeah, I was just thinking of the events. I was just thinking to myself like,
Yeah.
yeah, I can throw an event. I can cook and I can
Yeah.
invite people over. But then also like for example like the right proximity, as you said, right? Like for example like you were saying before that two values that you have is health and growth, right?
Hmm.
And like for you, if you put yourself in an environment where maybe it's the gym or like maybe it's a running club,
Hmm.
then you would have more chances, you will increase your chances for good
Yeah.
quality connections, right? And the same like with growth, like if maybe it's a entrepreneurship, okay, maybe not entrepreneurship per se, but like any event that has to do with growth,
Sure.
any type of growth, I guess. But yeah, it's quite interesting to put ourselves in the environments that align with our values, I guess, right?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. I think its environment is one of the more underlooked part of making friendships and social connections in general, friendships or otherwise. And I think when you also throw event, there's also lesser of that rejection problem and so on, because you're not inviting one person, right? You're inviting people, and so you
Yeah.
can diffuse that sense of, that's more of a, if you take a parallel, it's like branding. It's like you are building your own set of values, and then you're sending invites to people, as opposed to being needy and just being like, oh, I really want you to be my friend, or oh, please date me. That happens when you go one on one.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're doing events, you're just extending invites,
Yeah.
and it's more of a, is it a, I think I recommend people still do the rejection exercises because it builds yourself.
Yeah.
But the next, the I don't think that's like ideal. The ideal is your events and you inviting people into your life, and then by definition, that will be congruent to your values. So, for example, when I did my dinners, the food was
Mm.
healthy. Guess what? Like I didn't have to
I
ask
can
anyone
imagine.
to make it healthy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So because that's my values, it's my event, and it's going to be run by my values. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's how it goes.
No, 100%. I used to live with off topic, but I used to live with an Indian friend of mine now, right? Like, and he would cook all the Indian, like he
Hmm,
was from South India.
sure.
Oh my god, I miss his food. It was so good. He would always cook like big portions, that we would have like for 2 3 days.
Lovely, lovely.
Yeah. Moving on, like I really want to touch on niceness and goodness,
Sure.
right? As a person, what would you
Hmm,
say is the main differences between being nice and being
hmm.
good?
Yeah, yeah. So what we normally call nice, like is like a nice person.
Yeah.
What it often means is this, like you, like let's say if you're the nice person, it's like you do something, not exactly with the intention of being kind or helpful or something, but there's some covert intention that you will do something back for me. Like there's
Yeah.
just a little bit of a covert contract. Robert Glover used that word
Yeah.
in his book. So, um, whereas kindness, on the other hand, is simply for the benefit of others. It's like there's not
Mhm.
much of, you could expect something, but then there's like a more explicit agreement that's not just this sudden somehow need for approval. So when you are nice to someone, the underlying need there is, you approve of me, therefore. Like I'll be nice to you, but don't hate me. Like
Yeah.
I'll be a nice person, but don't reject me. There's
Yeah.
that internal sense of guardedness there. Whereas kindness is just kindness. You just help people, and that's it. That doesn't matter if you disapprove of me, I'm still kind.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's I think the core difference.
Yeah. That's a very good, to be honest, way of putting it. But then also, like, like from a psychology perspective, right? Like, what would you say are the underlying reasons why someone becomes nice? Or,
Yeah,
is it from their childhood, society? But
yeah,
what's like the underlying issue?
yeah. I mean, part of my burden in life is I have this PhD thing, but I also have this podcast and whatnot.
Yeah,
And niceness tends to be one of those things that is less about the science, because I'm not personally aware of
sure.
much science in that space. I don't think it exists, to be honest, because
Mm,
it is more of a pop culture thing. It's a very useful pop culture thing, because having talked about niceness for so long, it resonates very, very deeply with people.
sure.
Um, I think there's, in the psychology world, there's something called as anxious attachment styles. I think maybe that comes
Yeah.
kind of close.
Hmm.
But um, yeah, I think that's why, because it's not like a formally studied thing, you can't like literally say this is the cause or whatever. But if
I
I were
see.
to estimate, I would say, yeah, childhood and your conditioning. So when you're like younger, um,
Mm,
you go to school, and then if you didn't do your homework, your teacher might say, hey, a nice boy does his homework. And then that
mm,
might just be in your, like, my teacher approves of me when I do my homework. That would be the message that
yeah.
you get. um, or when you, uh, let's say you come, like a child comes home, and this is like a true incident, saw it in my family, that there's this one girl who was like playing around and throwing things around, and some adult in my family said, hey, look, nice girls don't do that. And look, so what
Mm,
are the message we are giving? Like, play, expression.
yeah.
That's not what nice people do. So
Mm,
therefore, the nice person is more subdued. It's more like,
yeah.
oh, tell me what to do. It's like a bit of like approval seeking that's inbuilt in it. And again, you asked me about the difference, right? It's not
Yeah.
about what is healthy for the child or for yourself. It's expression, it's play, and all of that.
Yeah.
But because you might have had that nice conditioning, you might associate that with not being nice, and therefore you might be living in that reality of someone else who thinks
Yeah.
what is nice and not, irrespective of whether that's ideal for you or not.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think, yeah, childhood, conditioning, society, parents, all that shebang is probably why people end up being nice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's quite interesting what you said about the anxious attachment style, because, like, of course, like, yeah, like normally there are two or three, right? Well,
Hmm.
three: anxious, avoidant, and then kind of the more secure
Secure. Yeah.
attachment, right? And I guess, like, depending on how you were raised, all these characteristics will come
Hmm.
out later on in life. And if you
Hmm.
were seeking approval, or if you had an anxious attachment, maybe
Hmm.
that means that you're a little bit more on the nice side, because
Right.
you're seeking that approval from other people, and you don't want that rejection. And it's quite interesting how everything's connected, right? Because, like, if you don't mind being rejected, then that means that, like, maybe that will have an effect on your niceness per
Hmm.
se, right? Like, you'll be less keen on just doing things for other people just for the sake of the approval, because, like,
Right.
maybe you won't care that much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think approval is the key word with
Mm,
niceness. It's
yeah.
like a lot of actions are done not out of goodwill, but out of approval seeking.
Yeah.
And you see that when the right thing to do might be to set a boundary. The
Hmm.
right thing might be to be put your foot down and be like, that's not me, or that's not my values. But the nice person would not do that. They would just go along because that's where the approval is.
Yeah. No, 100%. Is there a study, do you think, that shows if men or women are more inclined to be nice?
Yeah, again, as I said, I don't think niceness is a topic that's studied at all. But from my personal anecdotal data, I suppose, anecdata, uh, I think
Hmm.
uh, I think women are, they resonate with the message of niceness a bit more. But
Yeah.
another group also is people from more Eastern cultures, where like conformity and
Ah,
collectivism is a slightly bigger thing.
yeah.
So that's also where you might find a lot of like niceness. Another thing that's an analog in the psychology literature is agreeableness. So you get these personality profiling, and agreeableness can be, so maybe that's another proxy for niceness. And you would
Yeah.
see that people around me, like in India, there's much more of that niceness than it is than in the West. There's more in the UK than in the
Interesting.
US, for example. So it's
Yeah.
definitely, there's a cultural component to it as well. But yeah, I think broadly speaking, it is women more than men, in my opinion,
Yeah.
and it is more East than West.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And you know how we were talking about values, right?
Mhm.
Have you found a good way to create or find your values?
Yeah. Um, I think it's a good question because it starts with, it goes back to the discussion we started with, which is meditation
Yeah.
and so on. So the idea with meditation is, again, to study your mind. And part of your mind
Mm.
is what brings you joy, what brings you flourishing, what brings you thriving. In other words, your values.
Yeah.
So, like for example, if I lie, it's not just about, there's this moral construct of lying that I'm breaking. It's simply that my mind gets agitated. Like, it's not
Yeah.
a healthy thing. It's like, when you lie, you have to maintain all of these fictions in your mind and so on. You know what? It's mentally, for your mental health, it's better to not lie. So
Mm.
that's how you discover your values, which is, you see, you observe things, you observe your thoughts, you observe, if I hold this belief, it leads to good mental health. If I hold that belief, it leads to poorer mental health. And that's how you can refine and synthesize your values. um, and same goes with, you can extend um, that reasoning not just to yourself but now to everyone else. Like, what
Yeah.
brings well-being to me but also to everyone. Thankfully, it's
Yeah.
actually literally more or less the same things, right? Like, if I don't lie, it's not just beneficial for me, it's also beneficial for someone else. So
Yeah.
I think one deep thing about the mind is it tends to be like a microcosm of the larger world. So if you are like
Mm.
have a loving relationship between parts of you, then that's the same mental pattern you utilize to have loving relationship with others.
Yeah.
And so I think fundamentally values comes from self-awareness and knowing how the mind works fundamentally.
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah, I do believe in self-awareness, and then also another one that it was very nice, self-acceptance.
Hmm.
Accept who you are. Once you like find your flaws, kind of like, in a way, like once you become aware of your flaws, you know accept that that's who you are, you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
also like there's this culture of like, improvement, right? Continuous improvement and etc., which I
Yeah.
do believe. But then at some point, like, it becomes like maybe you're just changing your whole personality. That is
Yeah.
not possible. But it's like, no, 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 I'm doing it for the sake of improvement. But then at the same time, it's like, okay, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's better just to
Yeah.
accept something and accept
Yeah.
yourself, rather than just trying to improve yourself or completely change yourself.
Sure, I completely agree. There is so I have this one framework of emotional. So I boiled down my sort of work into emotional intelligence. That's the word I like,
Yeah.
and I think it has like 4 or 5 components, and one of them is self-compassion.
Mm.
Um, so you
Yeah.
can have this, you can achieve a lot, but if it's coming from a place of like self-hate, that
Mm.
achievement doesn't mean much because your life is going to be miserable.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, there is acceptance is the foundation of all emotional intelligence, and you have to, no matter what you want to achieve, all of that is hypothesis for the future.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, all great emotional intelligence starts with seeing who you are right now and fully accepting that without judgment, because that's just true. Otherwise, you're just fighting reality, right? And
Yeah.
that doesn't help anyone. So I think self-compassion is one of the bigger things that we are lacking as a society right now. Like, I think
Mm.
we prioritize achievement at all costs, and like attainment and success, and I'm all up for that. But I think the fuel for that should be compassion and not perfectionism or self-hate.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with you. Well, I will have to, yeah, I will take my time and think about that as well.
Hmm.
Because I think, like with I think with this type of thoughts and conversations, like, you have to take it back and like kind of ponder upon it.
Yeah.
But 100% compassion is another one that I have started thinking recently. Let's
Mm.
talk about emotional intelligence. So you mentioned on Threads that you want this year to build a community within
Hmm.
the space of EQ, right? So what's your plan?
Yeah.
What's the plan?
Yeah, fantastic question. I think it's the thing is, I've been completing my PhD until now, and
Yeah.
it's in the UK, right? So which means I'm on a visa and so on. And one of the conditions of the visa has been you can't start your own thing. Like, you can do like
Oh,
a
okay.
part-time job somewhere, but you can't really start your business and things like that. So I've
Mm.
been sort of tied, and that's why people have been asking me for so long, like, why don't you make a course, or let's do some in-person events like workshops and things like that. And I'm like, I'm all up for it, but I can't legally
Yeah.
do it. until now.
Yeah.
Until now, where
Until
I
now.
can,
Yeah.
okay, now I'm free. So
Yeah.
yeah, the plan is to, I think there's two things that I want to do. One is, as you said, a community. So
Hmm.
the idea would be you meet monthly online, and then
Nice.
there might be like a in-person aspect to it. And so in the one monthly call, I will like explain one lesson of emotional intelligence, which I think is the most relevant for that month, be it due to global events or my personal realizations or what the
Yeah.
community wants. So there will
Yeah.
be like that one call which will revolve around, and there'll be a lot of then discussion, like a online forum, and like courses in that and so on. And then the other thing is to launch like a big course on emotional intelligence, like for
Mm.
someone who wants to go really deep, and they'll be like, okay, I want to master emotional intelligence. What's the one thing I can go to, which has the highest density of information and insight? That's what the second thing that I want to create. So I
Wow.
made that a couple of years ago as a beta release, because obviously you can't sell anything. So, and I
Yeah.
tested it with a lot of people, and now I have like the feedback, and so it has gone through one round of iteration. I'm going to re-record now everything with like more fine things. So that's the two things. So like one is the community, because I believe learning and growth happens in communities,
Yeah.
not alone. So there'll be the
Yeah.
online community, hopefully with some in-person component. We'll have to see how that works out.
Yeah.
um, and then the third thing I'm doing is also building an app, like a journaling app, which will be part of the
Oh
community. So
wow.
it's not like a separate thing altogether. So
Yeah.
if you've joined the community, you will get that journaling app. But then that thing is like using AI and artificial intelligence, uses more of my PhD knowledge of
Yeah.
understanding questionnaires and your data and so on, and how can I create the best prompt for you to journal on today based on what we know about you and your circumstance right now. So those are a few things I'm working on. So hopefully 2025 will be very exciting. And ultimately all of this is to raise the emotional intelligence of the world, right? It's not just doing fancy things for the sake of it. So
Yeah.
hopefully it will help people, and in general help the world be more emotionally intelligent.
No, that's a beautiful, and honestly, like I will definitely, of course, follow through, right? Like in, like for
Hmm.
example, like I would love to sign up for that, because I really think like communities are gonna have a comeback. I think like people, like how we were talking before, right? Like with
Hmm.
loneliness, and the
Hmm.
levels are quite high. I think
Hmm.
people realize that, oh, like I think it's time to do something about that. And I
Yeah.
think like 2025, or like, and maybe beyond, communities will be a big part of many
Yeah.
people's like lifestyle.
Yeah, I agree. And we talked about values earlier, right? And it's no trivial thing to find people who align with your values. Like we just said it in one sentence, but it's actually a pretty hard thing to find people who align with values. I think one thing that community does, and I was very clear right from the start that whatever
Mm.
I do should have a community component. Otherwise, there is no growth. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's also facilitates that sort of finding people with the right values, because people who joined it have enough of mental space to think about emotional intelligence and
Yeah.
think about personal growth. So yeah, that's definitely an intention.
No, yeah, it's brilliant. I'm excited for you as well. But
Awesome.
if we take a step back, right? Like, how would you describe emotional intelligence, and why is it important as well?
Yeah, yeah. So I think I like to think of it in terms of first principles, right? We can
Okay.
talk a lot. We can make up things, but I think what we have fundamentally is a mind. And what we have is the mind can be flourishing, thriving, well-being, happiness, whatever you might want to call it. But that's on one end of the spectrum. And this has been a project of philosophers, religion, and so on, to reach that higher states of mind. And then
Yeah.
on the other side of spectrum might be, like chronic problems, perhaps mental health issues, not just of
Yeah.
the clinical kind, but like serious, let's say, trauma, and just like a very bad state of mind, let's just say. I think emotional intelligence is the big set of beliefs, skill set, thought patterns, mental skills that take you on that side of the spectrum, on the
Yeah.
happiness, well-being. So whatever the skill set that moves you up, I call that emotional intelligence.
Mm.
Um, and on the flip side, the emotional unintelligence would be going on the other side, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I look at emotional intelligence. It's really about the skill set that takes you to the higher side of the mind and flourishing and well-being side of mind.
Yeah.
On a more practical level, I think it boils down to five components, is I think where I put it. One is self-compassion,
Hmm.
which we just talked about. You need to be kind to
Yeah.
yourself, and that necessarily extends to others. The other one is identity and core beliefs. So who do you think,
Mm.
what is your sense of self? Do you think you're like a courageous person, or do you think you're pathetic? Like, what's your
Yeah.
internal sense of beliefs and core beliefs? Do you believe the world is friendly, or do you think everyone's out there to get you? Now, that's going to affect how you feel. Um, so that's core identity and core beliefs. The third thing is I'm going to come to action. Like one is action, but let's come to that last. The other one is focus. So where do you
Mhm.
direct your focus? So if I'm thinking of things that I'm grateful for every day versus if I'm thinking everything that's gone wrong every day, there's going to be two different states of mind that you're going to carry at the end of the day. And
Mm.
unfortunately, if you don't check these, the mind naturally gravitates towards negativity. That's why these news people use all sorts of negative headlines, because they know that's what's going to grab your attention.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so focus is a big deal. um, um, and so I think these are my internal skills, and then I supplement that with action and social connection. So action
Okay.
is, you need to go out in the world and act. Like if you just do armchair thinking and journaling, that will get you somewhat there, but it won't truly get you there. And the reason for that is all your negative thought patterns have formed in the relation with people. Like, the
Yeah,
niceness, for example, someone told you to be nice when it was counter your health, counter your mental health, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
so if you want to truly heal that, you want to be able to do that same behavior with a new set of people who accept you
yeah,
and don't call you nice and don't call you good or whatever, and they
yeah.
accept you fully, right? So armchair thinking is not enough.
Mm.
Self-compassion in your chair is not enough. Journaling is not enough. You have to go out in the world. You have to go and approach people. You want to make friends and so on. And the final is social connection. We have talked ad infinitum about this, so I'm not going to
Yes.
go in detail about it. But
Yeah,
in
yeah.
general, it's I think it's a fundamental pillar of mental and emotional health.
Yeah, wow. No, that's beautiful. And I really love all of them, all the five kind of pillars that you have. Yeah. And I do agree with you. Like, I think in the sense, like the armchair thinking, like so many people, like, kind of in a way, like you have like the keyboard warriors, right? Like, people who stay online and just
Yeah.
comment and like, talk it. But like,
Mm.
yeah, nothing can be achieved in life, I think, what you said, like without action. Like you have to go out there and make things happen. Things won't happen themselves, right? They won't build
Yeah.
themselves. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and with respect, I think a lot of therapists and
Mm.
people in that community, I think, sort of ignore that part quite often. I think there's a lot of, and fair enough, that's their expertise. So it's not like um, it's not necessarily wrong because they're specializing in one area, let's say. But a lot of times it happens that people who go to therapy do not notice as much improvement as they would like to, and I think the
Yeah.
core reason for that is the absence of action. And I can say this
Mm.
with enough confidence because I have talked to a lot of therapists who agree with me on this.
Mm.
And I think the people who I've seen have gotten a lot of change in people in their emotional and mental well-being are the therapists, are the coaches who encourage action, and not only
Yeah.
encourage it, but they put it as a fundamental foundation of their technique. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's great, like hypnosis, meditation, I'm all up for it. And obviously, I teach it. But I think the deepest healing happens once you have taken action and you see for yourself the change.
Yeah. 100%. I think we have covered it, but like, for example, do you think EQ is something that you can develop, or is it set?
Yeah, I mean, if it were not something that you could change, I would probably not talk about it,
Yeah.
right? But then why
Yeah,
would
yeah,
we?
yeah.
Then that's it's a futile exercise. No, I think I'm pretty confident that it can be changed. I've seen it happen in me. Like I wasn't
Mm.
born like this. Let's just say, hopefully if I have some EQ there, but it's not like I've definitely developed skill sets. I've actively gone and sought coaching. I've actively gone and learned meditation and mindfulness and so on. And I can feel changes in me every single year for the last decade.
Yeah.
And so I'm very, very confident that it can be grown and it
Yeah.
can be changed, and it's not a static part of you. And look, I mean, I was calling emotional intelligence skill, right? There's a reason for that, which means you can learn it, you can grow it. And I've not just seen it in myself, I've seen it in people, countless people who were like shy and isolated, including myself. I was like super shy growing up. And
Yeah.
then with these practices, with taking the right guidance and coaching and therapy and meditation and so on, you can 100% um, develop your EQ and grow your EQ. And I
Mm.
get there's a lot of techniques out there and people get confused and so on. I mean, part of my job in this world is to sort of synthesize and bring it down to what are the fundamentals. And
Yeah.
I guess that is something I would do in the world. But by and large, I'm very much confident that it is something you can grow.
Yeah. And like if you were to say, right, like, what are some ways that we can develop our emotional intelligence? Would you go with those five kind of pillars? Have self compassion, find your identity, or like build your identity and your core beliefs, focus, social connection, and action.
Absolutely, and I think because I get that question a lot. I think you can say, let's go and develop all of them, and that's a great idea. But I think what I've also done in the last few months, I think, is I've
Mm.
created a quiz, like a scorecard. And by
Okay.
created, I literally mean I've coded everything myself, and using my PhD skills, I suppose.
Yeah.
And the idea is it tells you which area of these five pillars you are the weakest at, and it
Hmm.
also then gives you suggestions on how to improve that specific area or any other
Oh
area.
wow.
So
Yeah.
it's dynamic to you, that person. It takes 2 minutes to fill, and as long as people give me 2 minutes of their time, I give, and it's all free and so on. So there's getting nothing from it. It's just you go, you see, okay, this is my score. Let's say I'm weakest at self compassion, and then it gives you recommendations on how to improve it, which is mostly episodes from my podcast. So
Yeah.
rather than listening to all podcasts or whatever which you don't resonate with right now or whatever, it gives you, self compassion, precisely this is the episode that will benefit you the most, and then people can go and choose. So basically, I think awareness is
Mm.
very important, and
Yeah.
one tool for that is the quiz. If you feel that it might be helpful to know which area to focus on, I suggest taking that quiz. I can share the link with you, and you can put it in the
Yeah,
description or
no,
something.
100%. I will have everything down below. I only have one more question, and then also, and we can kind of wrap it up. But like,
Hmm.
it's this end of January, but like we're still in 2025, right? So I want to talk
Hmm.
about New Year resolution goals. How can we set goals that will last?
I think the
Hmm.
biggest information or insight that I could give you, which is not pop culture, is I think you can set goals that will last if you ensure that they are fueled by self compassion and not by hatred. So if you're like,
Mm.
I'm such a loser, I didn't do the New Year's thing, or I didn't go to the gym, blah, 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 then I think the chances of it lasting are low. And if it does last, then it's kind of uninspiring,
Yeah.
right? Then you will become that person who is not fun to be around, even if you're like ripped, because
Yeah.
people sense that the fuel, the motivation that it has come from is not very healthy. So I think once you set goals and when you're following through, I recommend doing that with a sense of compassion to yourself. So for
Mm.
example, a lot of our goals don't work out because we are super busy. Like
Yeah.
we have theoretically put gym in the thing, but if you're working 9 to 5 and then you come home, you have some cooking to do, and then if you have children, you have to take care of the children, chances are that's why it's not working. And you can only see that if you're compassionate to yourself. If you're hard
Mm.
hitting and if you're just like, I'm such a loser, then you have lost the space to see why that goal hasn't worked out or why your
Yeah.
intention hasn't followed through. But if you have
Yeah.
compassion toward yourself, then you could be like, you could have almost like a heart to heart with yourself. Okay, you know what, let's just think about, why did I not go to the gym? Is it just I'm a loser? Is it as weird as that? Or is it because maybe I just don't have the time that I put in?
Yeah.
And then maybe
Yeah.
that triggers, okay, maybe I'll come home from work a little early, or maybe I'll enroll in a gym that's next to my house
Yeah.
so that I can go. So, I think it just gives you more space to play with. So I think everyone is going to fall through. There's no one who just like perfectly sticks to everything all the time. So I think
100%.
the critical change, a critical difference for the people who sort of stick through is what happens in the low periods. Are you talking to yourself with kindness and compassion and therefore figuring out what's going wrong? Or are you just hating yourself and that's the end of story?
Wow. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like we are so, like I think I have gone through that myself. So basically, for example, like with self improvement, right? Like, it's always the case of like, improve, improve, improve. And
Hmm.
people don't even know why they're improving. And I
Hmm.
have gone through that. That's what I want to
Yeah.
say. Like, I have
Yeah.
gone through that like cycle of self improvement and like,
Mm.
watching all the podcasts, kind of like, reading all the books, and it's like, okay, but like I'm not improving. And probably it's because of the armchair kind of analogy that you
Mm.
gave, right? Because I was not taking any action. But
Mm.
the thing is, I would not hate myself, but like I would be so hard on myself
Mm.
for not taking action, for not changing.
Yeah.
And again, it has been the last like 6 months, I'm like,
Yeah.
compassion. And
Yeah.
like it yeah, it's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It's when you say improvement, a lot of the quote unquote standard self help industry is not exactly improvement. It's just action at all cost, or
Yeah.
doing at all cost, or achievement at all cost. It's just not. I mean, is that improvement? That's like a very vanity way of thinking improvement. And I
Mm.
think I would personally, if I were to develop a sense of what's improvement for me, it would include self-compassion in it. Like it's. I think it's the difference of the fuels, right? It's not just about the outcome, because we know if you're just caring about the outcome, guess what we know that people who are ultra wealthy might also be miserable. Like
Yeah.
we know that for sure. We know that athletes who achieve a lot or whatever go through a major depressive period once that's done. So is that what improvement is? Like seriously, I think we can do
Mm.
better. So I think compassion is part of it, and that's why when I make the emotional intelligence course or in my scorecard, and I put self compassion as a very big pillar.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's beautiful. And honestly, I will follow through and I will do the questionnaire because I had seen it,
Yeah,
but I was like, you know, but I really want to see my kind of EQ level and take it from
yeah.
there. So, Sankal, where can people find you? So, what are the links that you would like to kind of,
Yeah. Yeah, I think since we've talked about the scorecard, and I think that's something that's I know for sure benefits a lot of people. I think by now I don't even know if more than 5,000 people have taken it. So it's a huge amount of
yeah,
reviews on that and positive comments. I think that's a great place to start. It's it's completely free, and it's very useful. I think it's just genuinely good thing. It's
yeah,
I think that's going to be beneficial, and what that does is also puts you on my mailing list,
mm,
and that's that way you can stay in touch. But if you prefer some other medium, like if let's say if you're a podcast listener, then I have a podcast called Understanding Emotions. If you want to check out my website, that's sankalpgarud.org. That's one way to find out. Or anyway, like there's Instagram, there's Threads,
yeah,
there's YouTube, whatever your jam is. I think you should be fine. You should be able to
yeah,
find me there. But
yeah,
largely speaking, I put my most time. I think on Threads I post every day, I suppose. Although a lot
hmm,
of it is repetitive because a lot of new people come in.
yeah,
And I think the newsletters, I think I put once a week. So once you put the
hmm,
scorecard, you would hear from me once a week. And I think the newsletter is where the in-depth people are. So that's where
yeah,
people I am allowed to go in depth, because I know these people have taken the scorecard. I know they care about emotional intelligence much more than the average attention span TikToker does. So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
where I go sort of in depth. But I'm everywhere. So I think it's up to you where you want to find me.
No, that's perfect. Let's finish it here. Sankal, thank you so much for your time. Honestly, it was brilliant conversation.
Great.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having me. I had fun.
Perfect.